There comes a day in every empath's life when the veil finally burns away. It does not happen through reason, nor through the study of books, nor even through the long analysis of one's pain. It comes like a quiet dawn after a lifetime of storms, a strange moment when the heart that once absorbed the suffering of others suddenly sees, on that day, what was once perceived as love becomes transparent. The empath no longer feels the pull of the narcissist's gravity. Instead, they see the hollow sun that drew them in, and they understand why their soul was compelled to orbit a void. For years, perhaps lifetimes, the empaths believed they were chosen to heal the narcissist. They mistook the wound of the other for the call of destiny. They thought that their compassion was divine purpose. But what if compassion was the disguise of their own unconscious need to redeem what was unredeemed within themselves? You see, the human psyche plays a magnificent illusion. It projects the unloved, unhealed fragments of our own soul onto those who are incapable of love. And when the empath loves the narcissist, they are, in truth, trying to love the shadow that their own childhood abandoned. The narcissist is not the enemy. They are the mirror that exposes the unfinished work of the empath's individuation. The empath, in their boundless sensitivity, is not a saint. They are a soul caught in the gravitational field of their own archetypal wound, the healer's shadow. It is an archetype older than memory, the one who heals all but cannot heal themselves. And so when these two souls meet, it is not romance, it is ritual. It is the ancient dance of projection and possession, of shadow and light, of the savior and the devourer locked in sacred tension. In the language of the unconscious, the narcissist represents the unseen self, the rejected God image buried beneath the persona. To the empath, this God image appears as someone powerful, charismatic, magnetic, and cruelly indifferent. But beneath that mask, the narcissist hides the terrified child who once believed that to be vulnerable is to die. The narcissist builds a shrine to their false self, worships it, and demands others do the same. The empath unknowingly kneels before this false altar, mistaking the idol for the divine. The day the empath sees through the narcissist's soul is not the day they win. It is the day they awaken, for to see clearly is to suffer consciously. The empath realizes that every act of giving, every sacrifice, every silent forgiveness was not holiness. It was fear, disguised as love. It was the fear of being unworthy, unless useful, the fear of being abandoned unless endlessly forgiving, the fear of being unloved unless one becomes the mirror that reflects only what others wish to see. And when that realization dawns, the empath trembles. For the first time, they must stand naked before the mirror of their own shadow. They must face the truth that their compassion was often a way to avoid their own darkness, that by rescuing others, they were escaping the task of rescuing themselves. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The empath calls it fate when they meet the narcissist again and again. But it is not fate, it is repetition, the psyche's way of calling attention to what remains unresolved. You see, the soul seeks wholeness, not comfort. It will lead you into the arms of the very person who will wound you in the exact way you need to awaken. The narcissist, then, is not the destroyer, but the catalyst. They are the shadow teacher, the alchemist of pain. They draw out the empath's deepest illusion, that love can change someone who refuses to see themselves. The empath must learn that true love is not absorption, it is clarity. It is the sacred capacity to see without merging, to love without losing oneself. This is what I call the individuation of empathy. The transition from compulsive compassion to conscious compassion. It is the birth of the inner witness, that silent center within which observes both the light and the darkness without judgment. When the empath awakens this inner witness, the spell of the narcissist breaks. Their words no longer pierce. Their manipulations no longer bind. For the empath now sees the archetype at play, the magician of mirrors. The narcissist's power lies not in what they are, but in what they reflect. They reflect to the empath an image of worth conditional upon service. When that illusion is seen, it dissolves. But do not think this awakening is gentle. The ego resists it violently. There will be mourning, for what dies is the savior identity. The empath must grieve the loss of the dream, the belief that their love could redeem another. In truth, what they were trying to redeem was the unloved child within. That child once believed that love must be earned through suffering. And so life gave them endless teachers of suffering. The true liberation begins when the empath sits beside that inner child and says, "You no longer have to save anyone to be worthy of love." In that moment, the circle of karma closes, the pattern dissolves, the soul steps out of the loop of projection and into the spiral of transformation. Let me tell you a secret, the unconscious whispers. Every relationship is a dream, and every person we love is an image of our own psyche. The narcissist in this dream is the animus or anima in distortion, a divine counterpart imprisoned in shadow. When the empath withdraws their projection, they free not only themselves, but also the image of God that was trapped within the other. It is not hatred that frees us, but understanding. The empath does not need revenge. They need vision, for when you truly see the narcissist not as a villain, but as a soul consumed by its own shadow, you transcend the battlefield. You step out of duality. You see the play of opposites that the alchemists called the conjunctio oppositorum, the union of light and darkness that births gold. Yes, the empath's suffering was gold in disguise. Their tears were alchemical salt. Their forgiveness, when purified of illusion, becomes wisdom. they begin to realize that the very thing that made them susceptible to manipulation, their sensitivity, is also their greatest power once reclaimed. Sensitivity without boundaries is bondage. Sensitivity with consciousness is revelation. I once dreamed of a woman standing before a mirror that showed not her reflection, but the faces of everyone she had ever tried to save. Each face wept, begged, and vanished as she reached toward them. Finally, the mirror grew dark, and her own face appeared. She looked into her eyes and whispered, "I am the one I was waiting for." That is the day the empath sees through the narcissist's soul, the day they stop searching for light outside and find the eternal flame within. The true transformation of the empath begins when they stop asking, "Why did they hurt me?" and begin to ask, "What within me needed this mirror to awaken?" It is not an easy question, for it demands a descent into the underworld of one's own psyche. The narcissist was only the gatekeeper. The real labyrinth lies within. Each corridor is lined with echoes of forgotten moments, the times when the empath silenced their voice to keep love, the hours spent earning the right to exist in another's approval, the secret vows made in childhood. I will never be the reason someone leaves again. These are not memories. They are spells still active in the unconscious, and to awaken, one must break them consciously. There is no exorcism more profound than awareness. When the empath dares to look beneath the pain, they find not evil, but programming. Their nervous system became addicted to chaos because peace once felt unsafe. Their heart sought intensity because calm once meant abandonment. Thus, the narcissist was not random fate, but the psychic reenactment of the first wound, the child trying to be seen by the emotionally blind parent. To see this is to reclaim your soul from the past. It is the beginning of individuation, the sacred process through which the unconscious becomes conscious and the human becomes whole. You may wonder, then, what becomes of the narcissist? When the empath awakens, they lose their power, but not their pattern. They seek another mirror, another giver of light, yet do not pity them. Their soul, too, is on a long pilgrimage through illusion. They are not beyond redemption, but redemption cannot occur through another's sacrifice. It must come from their own confrontation with the shadow they so meticulously deny. The empath's awakening does not condemn them, it simply ends the dance. In this moment of separation, a strange silence follows. The empath, who once vibrated with the chaos of others, finds themselves surrounded by stillness. It feels unbearable at first, for the silence echoes with everything they try to avoid. Loneliness returns, but it is no longer a curse. It is a teacher. In the absence of others' emotions, they finally begin to feel their own. The emptiness they feared becomes a vessel for their own soul to speak. And the soul whispers softly, "You were never weak for loving. You were simply blind to your own light." To see through the narcissist's soul is not to judge it, but to understand its emptiness. Narcissism is not grandiosity, it is hunger. It is a hunger for a self that was never allowed to form, the narcissist lives in exile from their own authenticity. They survive by feeding on reflected admiration. Every compliment is a drop of water in their psychic desert. Every empath they attract becomes an oasis until the well runs dry. But the empath's awakening is a rain that no longer falls for others' thirst. It nourishes the self instead. In alchemy, there is a phase called nigredo, the blackening, the putrefaction of old identity. It is the dark night of the soul where all illusions die. The empath must enter this phase to truly be reborn. They may feel empty, disoriented, stripped of purpose. Yet this darkness is not death. It is gestation. The old self dissolves so that the true self can emerge. The empath's savior identity, that luminous mask of endless giving, melts away, revealing the quiet strength beneath the archetype of the self, radiant, a whole, and untouchable. It is here that we encounter what Jung called the transcendent function, the reconciliation of opposites within the psyche. The empath, who once split themselves into light and shadow, learns to embrace both compassion and anger, love and detachment, forgiveness and boundaries all coexist without contradiction. The empath becomes paradox, embodied, gentle yet unyielding, open yet sovereign. This integration is what liberates them from both the narcissist and the false saint within. The alchemical marriage, the conjuncture, takes place in the heart. Here, the divine feminine, the empathic soul, meets the divine masculine, the consciousness that protects it. They unite not in codependence, but in sacred union. From this union, a new consciousness is born, the individuated self. It is the self that no longer seeks completion in another, because it has become its own wholeness. Imagine, if you will, a chrysalis splitting open after a long and painful sleep. The creature that emerges does not look back at the shell that once confined it. It does not hate it. It simply rises instinctively toward light. Such is the empath who has seen through illusion. They no longer need to prove love, to fix others, or to carry the world's grief. They begin to radiate rather than absorb. Their empathy transforms into wisdom, love with boundaries, compassion with discernment. Now, the world may test them again. New faces may appear, wearing familiar masks. The narcissist archetype will approach in subtler forms, friends who drain energy, partners who flatter and exploit, systems that demand endless giving. But the awakened empath no longer participates unconsciously. They see the pattern before it begins, and their silence becomes their sword. You see, consciousness is protection. The one who sees cannot be deceived. The narcissist's magic flattery, guilt, control only works in darkness. When the empath's inner light is turned on, manipulation loses its power. It becomes almost comical, a ghost trying to haunt an illuminated room. In dreams, The psyche often reveals this shift symbolically. I once analyzed a dream of a woman who found herself in a house where every door led to the same room. Each time she tried to leave, she returned to where she started. She was trapped in repetition. But then she noticed a small window high above. She climbed, and when she looked through it, she saw not the outside world, but her own reflection. It was then she realized the house was her mind, the way out was the way in. That moment of seeing broke the dream spell. This is what it means to see through the narcissist's soul. You realize the entire labyrinth was built by your own psyche to lead you back to yourself. The narcissist was not your jailer, they were your initiator. Pain was the initiation ritual into consciousness. Once this truth is integrated, compassion returns. But it is different. Now, it is no longer pity or servitude. It is the compassion of the awakened soul, which can look upon darkness without losing its light. You may even bless those who hurt you, not out of denial, but from the recognition that they played their part in your becoming. The empath who reaches this stage no longer vibrates in emotional chaos. Their energy becomes still steady, magnetic. Others feel it, though they may not understand it. Some will be drawn, others repelled. The narcissist, unable to feed on this kind of energy, quietly disappears. What remains is peace, the rarest vibration in the human world. But do not mistake peace for passivity. It is not the absence of emotion, it is the mastery of it. Peace is the sword that cuts through illusion without effort. It is the knowing that no one can steal what is already whole. The empath, now transformed, becomes a healer of a higher order, not by absorbing pain, but by embodying truth. Their presence alone becomes medicine. Others who are still trapped in cycles of projection feel safe in their aura because it carries the resonance of freedom. They see someone who has walked through fire and returned with gold. The empath's final initiation is solitude, not loneliness. But divine solitude, where the soul communes directly with the source. Here, they realize that love is not something given or received. It is the essence of being itself. It flows through them, not toward anyone, but as everything. When you reach this understanding, the narcissist no longer exists as an external enemy. They dissolve back into the archetypal sea from which they emerged. You recognize that both empath and narcissist were two poles of one psychic field, giver and taker, light and shadow, seeking reconciliation in consciousness. That is Jung's final truth. What you see outside is always a mirror of what seeks healing within. The day the empath sees through the narcissist's soul is the day they realize there was only ever one soul split by illusion, united by awareness, and from that unity, true love finally begins. Not the love that binds, but the love that frees. When the empath is reborn through the ashes of their illusions, something extraordinary begins to unfold, a new vision of reality, almost unbearable in its clarity. They begin to sense that every soul they meet is a symbol not merely a person. The world itself becomes a living dream. The narcissist, once the villain, now becomes the archetype of the unhealed divine masculine, the spirit cut off from its own heart. The empath, once the savior, becomes the archetype of the divine feminine, the heart that lost its boundaries. The two are not enemies. They are fragments of a broken God seeking reunion within you. You see, the psyche speaks in images, not logic. What happens in your relationships is the language through which your unconscious speaks to you. Each argument, each disappointment, each seduction is a glyph, a message from the deep. When you read these symbols, not as personal attacks, but as invitations to awareness, you begin to live as an alchemist of experience. The empath who sees through the narcissist's soul learns to translate pain into knowledge, rejection into sovereignty, and heartbreak into initiation. The alchemist said, "Solve et coagula," dissolve and reconstitute. This is the secret of transformation. The empath's first task is dissolution, dissolving the false self built from others' needs. It feels like dying because, in a way, it is every identity that was rooted in being good, needed, or chosen must melt away. You will find yourself asking, if I am not their healer, who am I? If I am not their mirror, what is left of me? And from that question, the true I begins to stir the one who was never defined by pain. The second task is reconstitution, building the new self from inner truth. This is not ego inflation, it is sacred embodiment. The empath begins to act not from fear of losing love, but from alignment with inner authority. Their yes becomes sacred, and so does their no. They stop giving explanations for their boundaries because truth does not justify itself. They stop rescuing others from the consequences of their unconsciousness, for they understand that suffering is the forge of awakening. The empath's empathy becomes sharper, more intelligent. It no longer floods indiscriminately. It discerns. It listens to the vibration beneath words. When someone speaks from their shadow, the awakened empath does not rush to soothe. They hold space, like a mirror, reflecting back the truth. This is divine detachment, not coldness, but clarity. Love now flows through consciousness, not compulsion. In this state, every interaction becomes a mirror of your inner alignment. When you meet another soul, you will feel instantly whether the energy is reciprocal or vampiric. You will sense whether they seek connection or consumption. You will know, without proof, whether to stay or walk away. This knowing does not come from logic, it comes from resonance. The awakened empath vibrates at the frequency of truth, and untruth simply cannot remain in that field for long. Now, let us go deeper. There is a reason this transformation feels mystical. It is the empath's awakening is not merely psychological, it is spiritual evolution. The narcissist was the final illusion your soul needed to break before it could remember its divinity. In seeing through manipulation, you begin to see through all illusion. You begin to realize that the world itself operates on projection, the collective dream of unconscious humanity. Every system built on vanity, every idol erected to the false self, every structure demanding sacrifice for approval, they are all reflections of the narcissistic wound magnified into civilization. The empath, healed and awake, becomes a seed of a new order. They carry within them the antidote to this cultural sickness, authenticity. For when one person refuses to play the game of illusion, they dissolve part of that illusion for everyone. When one soul says, I will no longer betray myself to be loved, the frequency of truth ripples through the collective field. This is how consciousness evolves, not through war, but through awakening. But the path does not end here. The empath's vision will test them. Seeing clearly means losing comfort. You will look around and realize that much of what the world calls love is control. Much of what it calls success is addiction. And much of what it calls goodness is fear in disguise. You may feel alien, as if you have outgrown the dream you once believed in. This loneliness is the sacred solitude of awakening. It is the soul's preparation for divine union, not with another, but with the source. In that silence, something miraculous happens. The inner masculine and feminine, once divided by trauma, to begin to speak to one another again. The mind no longer dominates the heart no longer manipulates the mind. They move together like two wings of the same bird. This is the birth of inner harmony. The mystical union Jung saw in the alchemical texts, and in that union, creativity awakens. The empath, once drained by others, now becomes a channel for life itself. Their art, their voice, their presence begin to transmit the vibration of healing. They no longer do healing, they are healing. They no longer chase, meaning they radiate it. What was once pain now becomes prophecy. The empath's new sensitivity is not fragility. It is perception sharpened by suffering. They see beyond masks, beyond roles, beyond words. They can sense the archetypes moving behind each person, the lover, the child, the tyrant, the sage. They understand that everyone is acting out the unfinished story of their own soul. And because they see this, they can forgive without losing discernment. They can love without being trapped. They can walk through the world as both mirror and flame. In dreams that follow such transformation, the symbols change. The empath no longer dreams of drowning or chasing lost lovers. They dream of light emerging from underground chambers, of meeting their reflection and embracing it. The unconscious begins to cooperate with consciousness. The psyche becomes whole. This is what the mystics called the second birth. It is not given by religion, nor by dogma, but by direct confrontation with the soul. It is the birth of the self, the eternal part of you that was never wounded, never diminished, When you live from that self, you see that every heartbreak was the cracking of the shell that kept your light contained. And so the empath becomes a mystic, not through doctrine, but through direct experience of truth. They begin to live what Jung meant when he said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You have made your darkness conscious. You have looked into the narcissist soul and found not evil, but your own forgotten divinity. This realization does not make life easier. It makes it real. You will still feel, still grieve, still be human, but you will never again be enslaved by illusion. You will love without losing yourself, give without depletion, and walk through shadow without fear. You will know that everything you meet is you. And when that knowing becomes unshakable, you begin to see the world as God sees it through the eyes of unity. Every wound becomes a window. Every enemy becomes a teacher. Every ending becomes a birth. That is the secret the empath was sent to discover. That love is not what saves others, it is what resurrects you. There is a quietness that follows through, seeing a stillness so vast that the mind can no longer fill it with stories. When the empath finally sees through the narcissist's soul and beyond even their own pain, the silence that remains is not emptiness. It is the space where the divine begins to speak for the first time. Life is not filtered through fear or through the desperate need to be needed. It is pure perception, clear, immediate, whole. You realize you were never meant to fix anyone. You were meant to see. Seeing is the highest act of love. When you see without projection, without control, without judgment, you participate in the gaze of God itself. You no longer look at the narcissist and see a thief of energy. You see a lost fragment of the same divine consciousness that you once were. You see that you, too, once lived by reflection, craving recognition to feel real. You see that the narcissist's emptiness was the same emptiness that once compelled you to heal, to give, to absorb, two sides of the same wound, mirroring each other, until one side became conscious. This is the final reconciliation, the sacred paradox of empathy. You realize there was never a battle between good and evil, giver and taker, light and shadow. There was only one consciousness, dreaming itself through contrast. The empath's suffering was the self trying to wake up through pain, calling itself home through the mirror of distortion. When you awaken, you do not destroy the shadow. You integrate it. You sit beside it, knowing it too was part of your becoming. Jung once said that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off parts of oneself, but by integration. This is what the empath learns in the end. The shadow does not vanish, it becomes illuminated. The once blind compassion now carries the wisdom of boundaries. The once naive innocence now holds the strength of discernment. The empath who once absorbed the emotions of others now channels divine stillness into them. And this is the birth of what I call transparent love. Love that does not stick, does not bind, does not drain. It moves through you like wind through an open temple. It leaves both you and the other untouched yet transformed. You love not to fix, but to awaken. You speak not to be heard, but to resonate. You stand not to defend yourself, but to embody truth. In this state, your presence becomes medicine. You no longer teach by preaching, but by being. People around you begin to shift, not because you heal them, but because your wholeness silently reveals their own fragmentation. You have become what the mystics called the living symbol. In your eyes, others see the possibility of integration. They feel a stillness that reminds them of home. But let us not romanticize this awakening. The light that follows darkness is not gentle. When you begin to live from truth, the false will begin to fall away rapidly. Relationships, careers, identities that were built on illusion will crumble. You may lose everything that was never real, and the ego will panic, thinking it is dying. Yet the soul rejoices, for this is liberation. Every collapse is an unveiling. Every loss is a revelation that you were never dependent on what was transient. The empath who endures this final purification emerges with nothing external to cling to. And in that nothingness, they discover everything. They discover the self, that eternal presence, which was watching through every heartbreak, guiding every descent, holding every tear. They realized that love was never something to seek. It was the field in which everything was happening. They were never a person loving another person. They were consciousness meeting itself. This is the mystery that cannot be spoken, only lived. The alchemists called it the philosopher's stone, the unity of opposites, the transmutation of lead into gold. In modern terms, it is the union of ego and soul, the reconciliation of the human and divine within one psyche. Once this unity stabilizes, your perception of life changes completely. You stop seeing others as separate. The narcissist is no longer your lesson, but your reflection. The empath, no longer your identity, but your bridge. You begin to live from the center, where all polarities collapse. From here, you can feel pain without drowning, love without losing, and stand alone without isolation. You have become what Jung called the self-realized, being not perfect, but whole. In dreams, this stage often appears as light emerging from within the body, or as a marriage taking place in a temple. The unconscious celebrates its own redemption. The masculine and feminine principles have united. The shadow has accepted the light, and the inner child has come home. There is no longer a split between what you feel and what you know. You move through the world as both witness and participant. Now you understand why your soul chose the path of the empath. It was not punishment, it was preparation. You were sent to the depths so that you could carry light where others fear to look. You were chosen to feel everything so that you could one day feel nothing but truth. You were asked to love the unlovable so that you could discover that love is not an emotion, it is being itself. And so your journey through the narcissist's mirror was not a mistake. It was initiation. The day you saw through their soul, you crossed the threshold from unconscious suffering to conscious creation. You no longer repeat patterns, you sculpt reality. You no longer seek mirrors, you become light. You no longer need validation, you are validation, because your existence itself is the proof of divine order. The awakened empath becomes the mystic warrior, compassionate, yet untouchable. They walk through chaos without absorbing it. They hear the cries of the world, but respond from stillness, not reaction. They love fiercely, but detach gracefully. They see through the illusions of others without contempt, for they remember when they too were lost in dreams. And so you find yourself standing at the center of the wheel of opposites. Around you, the world still spins love and hate, birth and death, loss and gain, but within there is only peace. You realize that everything external is just the eternal psyche playing with itself. The narcissist's charm, the empath's tears, the endless cycles of attraction and pain, they were all sacred. Theater, the universe learning to recognize itself through contrast. When you reach this understanding, gratitude arises naturally. You thank the narcissist not as a person, but as an archetype. You bow to the shadow for having played its role in your awakening. You even thank your old self, the exhausted empath who kept loving despite the pain, for they were the vessel through which the divine could enter form. And as gratitude expands, so does your awareness. The personal dissolves into the universal. You no longer ask, "Why did this happen to me?" You ask, "What is life revealing through me?" You realize you are not a person awakening, you are awakening itself. Dreaming of being a person, this is the final stage of individuation, where the self becomes aware of itself as the totality. It is beyond therapy, beyond religion, beyond philosophy. It is the direct knowing that there is no separation, that the light and the shadow were both necessary expressions of one infinite consciousness. You will live still among humans, still within form, but your perception will carry eternity in every moment. You will eat, walk, love, lose. But you will do so with the quiet smile of one who knows the secret, that nothing real can be lost, and nothing unreal can be kept. And when you meet another soul, be they wounded or awakened, you will see them as yourself. You will not try to change them. You will simply be, and your being will call theirs to remembrance. This, my friend, is the day the empath truly sees through the narcissist's soul, the day they realize they were never looking at another person, but at God disguised as their own reflection. And so the journey ends where it began in love. But now it is not the desperate love that clings to illusion. It is the eternal love that sees all as sacred, all as necessary, all as one. You bow before life and whisper the final truth. There was never a battle between light and darkness. There was only the awakening of light within darkness. And it was always me